Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world where bread was not just food, but a little stage for tricks, survival, and sometimes outright fraud. You picture yourself walking through a narrow medieval alley, the air heavy with wood smoke, the damp stones slick underfoot. Stalls creak with baskets of loaves, each one smelling both inviting and suspiciously dense. You reach for one, and you probably won't survive this next thought. What if, instead of fluffy wheat, you just paid for a hunk of hidden rock? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing who else is wide awake out there, half asleep with me in this strange little corner of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a bakery, the wooden door propped open by a wedge of iron, and you hear the thump of dough hitting a board. The baker's hands move quickly, flour streaking up his sleeves, sweat cutting pale rivers through the dust on his forehead. Bread is life here. Bread is survival. But bread is also a number, measured, weighed, and inspected by officials who check whether loaves are truly worth the coin you've just spent. And that's where the stones slip in, quite literally. Bakers desperate to stretch their profits sometimes knead in little surprises. Pebbles, bits of clay, even ground-up grit, to make a loaf appear heavier than it really is. Not a fun discovery when you're biting into what should be soft crust. Imagine crunching down and realizing your daily bread doubles as dental training equipment. Of course, it wasn't just about greed. Grain was unpredictable, harvests fickle, and penalties harsh. A loaf found underweight could mean a fine, public humiliation, or worse. Historians still argue whether some bakers really did this often, or whether it's one of those exaggerations townspeople like to whisper while queuing for bread. Still, the records do mention suspicious loaves, and the punishment of being locked into a medieval pillory while your neighbors chuck old crusts at you doesn't sound like an exaggeration anyone would invent, just for fun. The quirky part? Some towns believed bread itself could absorb curses, that ill intentions lodged in a loaf might carry bad luck into a home. So, between fears of sorcery, superstition, and sneaky rocks, every bite carried a bit more suspense than your midnight snack of leftover pizza ever will. You imagine walking home, bread tucked under your arm, feeling the heft of it. Heavy is good, you think. Heavy means filling. Unless, of course, the heaviness comes from the river stone the baker. The night stretches further, and you wander along the cobblestones, loaf under your arm, the faint echo of boots fading behind you. Around the bend, you stumble into a structure that doesn't smell of yeast or smoke, but instead carries the faint whiff of beeswax, ink, and damp stone. You step closer, and the low murmur of chanting rises and falls like waves against a shore. You have found yourself outside a monastery, and here, the rhythms of sleep are nothing like the ones you know. Inside these walls, time is carved not into 8 hours of rest, but into fragments, tiny slices of prayer and silence, measured by bells rather than clocks. The monks live by the rule, which says nothing about a luxurious night's sleep, but everything about devotion, discipline, and the expectation that even darkness belongs to God. It is cold inside, you imagine. The air heavy with the faint sweetness of old candle stubs and the sharpness of limestone walls. Your steps echo, and though you whisper, even your breath feels too loud. Here, sleep is not a continuous indulgence, but a concession. The monks go to bed early, before the night even deepens, and then, Just as your own body might be sinking into a dream, they are summoned again. At midnight, a bell shatters the silence, calling them to rise, shuffle into the choir, and chant through matins. Voices rise in unison, the vibration filling the nave, sounding both otherworldly and oddly mechanical, as if they are themselves cogs in a divine machine. And then, after the words fade and the candles gutter low, they return to their cells for a few more hours of slumber, before being woken once more at dawn. It is, historians note, an early example of what we now call segmented sleep. The idea that humans were designed to sleep in two stretches, a first sleep, a period of wakefulness, and then a second sleep. In the monastery, this wasn't just an idea. It was enforced by bells that cared nothing for your dreams. Imagine, if you will, trying to explain to your modern boss that you were late to work because your sleep schedule was broken into pious fragments dictated by an abbot with a large bell. Somehow, you suspect, HR would not approve. Yet outside the cloisters, this segmented sleep seeped into ordinary life. In many villages, families went to bed when it was dark, woke in the middle of the night for a stretch of wakefulness, sometimes to pray, sometimes to tend to animals, sometimes just to talk. And then, they slipped back under their wool blankets for a second round of rest. There are letters, diaries, even court records that mention this first and second sleep as casually as we might mention a coffee break. You picture yourself, one night centuries ago, stirring awake in a narrow bed, hearing the scratch of mice in the straw, the creak of rafters above. Instead of tossing and turning, you sit up, light a small candle, and thumb through a book of Psalms. Or maybe you shuffle over to a neighbor's house, because in that quiet pocket of the night, visits were not unusual. It's almost comical to imagine your neighbor knocking on your door at 1:30 a.m. with a cheerful, "You up?" And yet, there it was, the medieval version of your friend texting you memes at midnight. The mainstream fact is that monasteries structured much of medieval Europe's concept of time, and the broken rhythm of their prayers normalized the idea that the human night could be sliced into multiple phases. The quirky tidbit, however, is that some monks, so weary from this constant waking, developed clever cheats. There are whispers that a few tied ropes under their arms, leaning against the wall during prayer, so if they nodded off, they wouldn't collapse to the floor. A divine nap hack, if you will. Historians still argue whether this practice of broken sleep was universal, or whether it was more a product of monastic discipline, trickling only into certain rural households. Some claim the two sleeps idea is overstated. The diaries mention it, but not in a way that proves everyone lived that way. Others insist the pattern was widespread, supported by evidence across cultures. You get the sense that even scholars, after long conferences debating sleep, might themselves need a nap. And you, standing there in the cool hush of the cloister, can almost hear the shuffle of sandals on stone as the monks return to their straw mats. You imagine the small dormitories, narrow cots, rough woolen blankets, no pillows except perhaps a folded cloak. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool and unwashed robes. Somewhere, a candle hisses, wax pooling onto a wooden shelf. And yet, through the fatigue, there is calm. There is also humor, if you look closely. For instance, in some abbeys, if a monk was caught snoring during prayers, the others were allowed to poke him with a stick. You picture a long, sacred chant, voices rising, until suddenly, snore, and a sharp jab from Brother Gregory with his holy rod of stay awake. You might think your coworkers are bad when they cough during Zoom calls, but at least no one's allowed to jab you mid-meeting. As you wander back into the night air, the bell sounds again, faint but insistent, a reminder that here, time is not yours. The rhythm of waking, of dozing, of breaking sleep into pieces is imposed by centuries of ritual. And as you step away from the monastery walls, you can almost feel your own eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the repetition of chant and silence. The loaf of bread under your arm is still there, heavy, suspiciously solid. The monks, if you handed it to them, might break it, dip it into broth, and chew slowly, finding solace in a meal after prayer. They might not notice the pebble baked inside, or perhaps they would, and chalk it up to the mysterious ways of providence. Either way, you continue down the road, the stones of the path echoing the stones in your bread. And just as the road bends away from the monastery, and the chants fade into silence, replaced once more by the uneven beat of your steps against old stone, the loaf under your arm feels heavier than before, though you can't decide if it is the actual weight or simply the nagging suspicion that half of it is masonry disguised as crust. Either way, you carry on, drawn by the dim flicker of a torch against plastered walls ahead. The air grows warmer, dustier, and when you duck beneath a low lintel, the world around you shifts, not to Europe now, but to the banks of the Nile, where dreams themselves were once written down like recipes. You picture yourself standing in a small chamber lit by oil lamps, their smoke curling into the air like faint handwriting against the ceiling. In your hands is a roll of papyrus, stiff yet flexible, ink brushed in precise lines that look like tiny dancing figures. This is no shopping list or love letter. This is a dream manual, one of the strangest artifacts of the ancient world, and it claims to tell you exactly what your restless mind is trying to say after nightfall. The Egyptians believed that sleep was a time when the boundary between the divine and the human thinned, and so the visions you saw had meaning. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine drifting into sleep beside the Nile. The warm wind stirs the reeds, frogs croak softly, and you slip into a dream. Perhaps you see yourself drinking clear water. According to the manual, that is a good omen. It promises health and stability. But if in your dream you drink muddy water, well, expect sickness. This is not just superstition. It is a framework for making sense of the inexplicable chaos of the subconscious. Mainstream historians agree that entire collections of these dream books existed. One papyrus in particular, dating to around 1200 BCE, catalogs hundreds of dream scenarios. You flip through in your mind. If a man sees himself eating crocodile flesh, good. He will become a great official. Not exactly the fortune cookie you were hoping for, but comforting if you happen to wake up hungry for reptile meat. Quirky detail? Some Egyptians actually went to special temples, called dream temples, to incubate dreams. They would lie on mats inside, fast, chant, and wait for visions sent by gods. Imagine camping out overnight, just so you can wake up and tell a priest, "Well, I dreamt of a giant cat wearing sandals. What does that mean?" It is strangely endearing, the thought of an entire society treating dreams as public property, worthy of decoding, debating, and, if you are lucky, reshaping your future. Historians still argue whether these manuals were really taken seriously by the average Egyptian, or if they were more symbolic guides used by the priestly class. Some claim ordinary people leaned heavily on them, that daily choices hinged on whether a dream predicted good or bad fortune. Others argue they were more ceremonial, never intended for literal use. You imagine modern scholars poring over translations, half amused, half bewildered, and maybe slightly envious that their own dreams rarely come with such detailed instruction manuals. The sensory world of it seeps into your mind. You picture reeds rattling in the breeze, smell the sweetness of lotus oil rubbed into linen, feel the coarse weave of a mat beneath your back. A priest in a white robe leans over you, listening as you describe the dream you just had, nodding gravely as though your subconscious really is the daily news from the gods. The priest then scribbles your dream's classification into a roll, filing it next to hundreds of others, each a small glimpse into the interior life of people who lived 3,000 years before you. And here you pause, thinking of your own dreams. You may have woken recently from one of those oddly modern nightmares, being late to a meeting, or endlessly typing a password that will not work. Imagine telling that to an Egyptian priest. He might stroke his chin and decide it means you are destined for responsibility, or perhaps simply that you have angered the god of papyrus scrolls. Either way, your dreams, even now, might have been inked onto parchment, debated under lamplight, turned into omens for your future. It is a reminder that across centuries, sleep has always carried mystery, and people have always tried to explain it. Today, you Google "dream of teeth falling out meaning" and find yourself scrolling through dozens of opinions. Back then, you trudged to the temple and asked a priest who, with greater confidence, told you exactly what was about to happen. You move slowly through the chamber, fingers brushing the edge of shelves lined with curled papyri. Each one holds 100 lifetimes of subconscious wanderings, flying above the desert, swimming with crocodiles, speaking to long-dead ancestors. The air is thick with incense, slightly sharp, meant to purify the space. And for a moment, you imagine yourself lying back on a reed mat, letting the sound of cicadas fill your ears, waiting to slip into a dream that might become tomorrow's advice. A light joke drifts into your thoughts. If dreams truly dictated status, then surely some poor villager woke up embarrassed after dreaming of forgetting his sandals, only to be told this meant his family line would dwindle. Awkward breakfast conversation indeed. Or maybe a farmer dreamed of endless bread and awoke, grinning, only to realize his wife was scolding him because the oven had burned down. You chuckle softly, realizing people 3 millennia ago probably laughed at the absurdity of their own dreams too. Yet even through the humor, you sense how seriously they took it. A world without electric light, without glowing screens to blur the edges of reality, would lean heavily into the vivid theater of sleep. In a place where stars stretched endlessly overhead, dreams felt like messages painted across the sky, waiting to be interpreted. And you, drowsy listener, are gently nudged to see your own restless nights as part of a tradition stretching back thousands of years. The wind shifts, the torches sputter, and you find yourself stepping once more into the night air, the Nile breathing cool against your skin. Behind you, the dream manuals remain. Carefully roll, the river fades behind you, the reeds shrinking into darkness, and your feet find stone once more. The hush of the Egyptian dream temple lingers in your ears like an afterthought. But the world has shifted again. Now you are standing on a Roman street, its paving stones warm from the day's sun, though the night has settled in fully. Lamps flicker above doorways, their small flames shivering against brass reflectors, throwing strange shadows across stucco walls painted with fading frescoes. You take a slow breath, and the scent of olive oil, smoke, and faint lavender drifts over you. The Romans, as it happens, took their sleep very seriously, or perhaps not seriously enough, depending on how you judge their strange collection of nighttime contraptions. Step closer to a Roman house, and you notice the doorway framed with vines. Inside, the floor cool beneath your sandals, you are greeted by the soft drip of water from an indoor fountain. Beyond it, couches are arranged, not unlike the daybeds you might scroll on your phone from. Yet here, no one scrolls, though perhaps someone does snore loudly, sprawled after too much wine. Romans had a range of bedtime gadgets, simple, clever, and occasionally baffling. You brush your hand along a soft cushion, stuffed not with down, but with reeds, wool, or, if you were wealthy, feathers plucked from geese. The poor, naturally, had straw palates, and if the straw made you itch, well, that was your problem. Mainstream fact: Roman households often slept together in shared spaces. Privacy was not a concept the way you know it. Entire families crowded into small rooms, servants stretched on mats, and travelers sometimes curled in doorways. Only the elite had separate chambers, fitted with raised beds, polished frames, and curtains to keep out drafts. And if you were especially rich, you had multiple beds, each for a different purpose. One for napping, one for dining, one for sleeping. You imagine trying to explain that distinction to IKEA. Yes, I'll take the lunchtime nap couch, the midnight feast recliner, and the actual bed, please. As you wander deeper into the domus, you find another curious invention. Oil lamps, designed not only for light, but also for atmosphere. Their little reservoirs could be carved into shapes: dolphins, leaves, even body figures not exactly designed for bedtime calm. Quirky detail? Some Romans believed that rubbing the smoke from extinguished lamps on your eyelids could cure insomnia. The next time you complain about blue light ruining your sleep, just be glad no one is smearing lamp soot on your face. Historians still argue whether Romans truly valued long, uninterrupted sleep, or whether their famously busy schedules forced them into a pattern more like naps than full nights of rest. Letters from writers like Seneca hint at a culture where people stayed up late, rose early, and caught little fragments of slumber in between. The evidence is scattered, but the debate lingers. Were Romans chronically sleep-deprived, or simply adjusted to a rhythm that seems unbearable to us now? You picture the night gradually quieting. Somewhere in the forum, the last argument of the day fades as stallholders pack up amphorae of wine and dried figs. The smell of smoke rises from a tavern where gamblers reluctantly leave their dice. You slip back into a house where a wealthy merchant reclines. His bed frame is carved of ivory, his mattress stuffed thick with goose feathers. Drapes fall heavy, muffling the noise of the city. Yet even here, the hum of the Roman night presses in. Dogs barking, fountains splashing, the distant rattle of a cart. Sleep was never fully silent. You turn your attention to the poor, those who lay on straw pallets in cramped apartments called insulae. The walls here are thinner, the air filled with the scent of cooking fires, sometimes smoke heavy enough to choke. A mother pulls a child close, wrapping him in her thin cloak. Someone snores in the corner. Someone else coughs. The building creaks with the weight of too many lives stacked too high. Sleep here was more survival than luxury. Yet still, small comforts existed. Charms against nightmares, prayers whispered to household gods, and maybe even the faint trick of drinking warm milk before bed. Some traditions never change. A moment of humor arises as you imagine a Roman traveler explaining his bedtime routine. Yes, I place a wax tablet under my pillow to absorb bad dreams, light a lamp shaped like Hercules, smear soot on my eyelids, and then hope the neighbor doesn't throw a party. Your modern bedtime ritual suddenly feels very simple in comparison. The gadgets extended beyond lamps and bedding. Archaeologists have uncovered curious objects, bronze earplugs, perhaps designed to muffle the snoring of your bedmate. You smile at the thought. Somewhere, 2,000 years ago, someone rolled his eyes at his partner's endless snorting and said, "I can't do this anymore." And thus, earplugs. Another quirky invention, small amulets shaped like phalluses, hung above beds to ward off nightmares. Yes, apparently a dangling charm was enough to scare away bad dreams. The scholarly debate about Roman sleep patterns continues. Some claim that they slept in short bursts, a siesta in the afternoon, and only a few hours at night. Others argue they valued deep, long rest, citing luxurious beds as proof. The truth may lie in between, a society so bustling, so layered with festivals, politics, and household duties, that sleep adapted fluidly. What is certain is that they left behind traces of their nighttime anxieties, amulets, remedies, rituals, and enough oddities to remind you that humans have always wrestled with rest. You step back into the courtyard. The fountain still trickles, the moon's pale reflection trembling in its pool. A breeze shifts the curtains, and the lamplight wavers across the mosaic floor. You hear the cobbles under your feet gradually smooth into packed earth, and the air warms with a faint sweetness. Something fried, something smoky, and something you cannot name, but want to follow. You look up and find yourself beneath a canopy of paper lanterns. Their light sways gently in the night breeze, glowing orange and pale green, each flame cradled inside fragile shells of paper stretched across bamboo frames. Shadows flicker across the crowd, and suddenly you are in a Chinese night market many centuries ago, where sleep seems almost optional, and the dark is alive with sound. You step carefully, weaving between stalls. Each one clatters with activity. A bronze pan hisses as dumplings are dropped into bubbling oil, steam rising in clouds that carry the scent of garlic, ginger, and sesame. Vendors shout over each other, their voices carrying urgency but also rhythm, like the call and response of a song. You feel your stomach twist with hunger despite the loaf of questionable bread tucked beneath your arm. It would be rude, you think, to refuse the night's offerings, even if your teeth are still on guard from medieval pebbles. Mainstream fact. In Imperial China, especially from the Tang Dynasty onward, night markets were hubs of commerce and entertainment. The government at times banned them, fearing disorder. But the bans never lasted. People always found their way back under the lanterns. Here, after the day's work, the city awoke again. Traders laid out silks, entertainers juggled, storytellers drew crowds, and cooks fried food until dawn. The quirky detail is the lullabies. While the market roared outside, families at home crafted soft songs for children, tunes passed down for generations. Some were gentle chants about the moon, others about animals, or even about simple chores like weaving cloth. You imagine a mother rocking her child near the flicker of a small lamp, humming a tune about washing rice, while outside her window, drums and laughter shake the streets. Sleep here was not the universal command it seemed to be elsewhere. Instead, it was a fragile, negotiable act, squeezed between noise and necessity. Historians still argue whether these markets were truly places of freedom for commoners, or whether they were carefully managed spectacles serving the elite. Some scholars point to evidence of heavy regulation, curfews, patrols, officials watching the stalls. Others claim the markets were organic, stubbornly surviving against authority, proof of ordinary people carving out their own night. The debate lingers like the smell of smoke, clinging long after the stalls close. You walk deeper, brushing shoulders with strangers. A musician plucks a lute, its notes bright but plaintive, like the cry of a bird across water. A juggler tosses porcelain cups into the air, catching them with sharp smacks of his palms. Children dart through the crowd, chasing each other between legs, while their mothers shout warnings half in jest, half in fear. At one stall, an elderly man carves charms from bone, whispering promises that they will ward off bad dreams. You lean closer, and he grins, holding up a small crescent moon. The lantern light glints on its polished surface, and you almost believe him. A gentle humor threads its way into the chaos. Imagine, for a moment, a weary official trying to enforce curfew, only to be distracted by the smell of fried buns. He stops, buys one, and suddenly forgets about the law he was meant to uphold. Even now, you sense that no decree could silence a crowd hungry for flavor and company. At the edge of the market, you notice quieter spaces. Tea houses, their doors half open, release fragrant steam. Inside, scholars hunch over scrolls, sipping bitter green tea to keep themselves awake. They argue in low tones about philosophy, the balance of yin and yang, the turning of dynasties. One scholar scratches a character onto bamboo, muttering that dreams reveal the harmony of heaven and earth. Another scoffs, saying dreams are nothing but the restless digestion of dumplings. You smile at the contrast, remembering the Egyptian priests who took dreams so seriously. The arguments across centuries and continents sound uncannily alike. As you wander further, you imagine the lullabies again. A child stirs in a small room, too restless from the noise outside. His grandmother leans close and sings of a rabbit on the moon, pounding rice cakes with a pestle. The song weaves softly through the wooden walls, cushioning the clamor of the street. And slowly, the child drifts back into slumber, cocooned in words, even while laughter rattles the shutters. The duality fascinates you, markets roaring with vitality, homes whispering toward rest, both coexisting under the same canopy of night. The scholarly debate continues in your thoughts. Did people really stay out until dawn? Or were the markets more sporadic, reserved for festivals? Some chronicles describe night after night of bustling stalls, while others suggest these were rare occasions, amplified in memory. You realize the truth is as layered as the crowd itself. Merchants hawking, families strolling, priests frowning, children yawning, all stitched together by lantern glow. And you, drowsy but curious, drift along, feeling your senses sharpen even as fatigue settles in. Your hand brushes a silk scarf, smooth as water. Your ears fill with a drumbeat, steady as a heartbeat. The steam from a fresh dumpling fogs your vision, making the lanterns blur into halos. You think you could stay here all night, awake in the endless performance of it all. A light joke slips into your mind. Perhaps this was the world's earliest 24-hour convenience store, except instead of neon signs and humming refrigerators, you had jugglers, steaming buns, and scholars ranting about cosmic order. The thought makes you chuckle softly, though your laughter blends with the crowd until it is just another note in the night. The lanterns dim behind you, their glow shrinking until they are no more than sparks floating in memory. Ahead, the air thickens with the scent of smoke and salt. You hear the rhythmic crash of waves against a rocky shore, and beyond it, the guttural thrum of voices lifted in song. As you approach, the ground beneath your boots softens into damp grass, and then the flicker of flames leaps into sight. A great hall rises from the night, its roof low and heavy with sod, smoke spilling from a hole cut into the center. Around it, figures cluster, their shadows stretching long across the earth. Welcome to a Viking settlement, where sleep is never taken for granted, and midnight can be the start of a feast. You push open the rough wooden door, and the warmth hits you like a wave. The fire in the hearth blazes, spitting sparks up into the rafters. Benches line the walls, crowded with men in wool tunics, women in bright woven aprons, and children peering curiously at strangers. The smell is overwhelming. Smoked fish, mead sweet as honey, and the unmistakable tang of sweat after long days of labor. Someone slaps you on the shoulder, pulling you toward the bench. A horn brimming with ale is pressed into your hand. The hall vibrates with energy, even though the hour is deep. For these people, midnight is not always for sleep. It is for celebration. Mainstream fact: Viking societies often treated night as fluid. After raids, voyages, or long harvest days, they gathered in halls to feast, drink, and sing. Sleep was postponed until exhaustion forced it. Archaeological remains of halls show their scale. Long, wide buildings designed to hold dozens, sometimes hundreds, of revelers. These were not just dining halls. They were centers of community, politics, and ritual. The quirky detail is the food that carried them through these nights. Smoked fish, dried meats, and sour bread filled bellies, while mead, fermented honey, flowed freely. Some sagas even describe midnight meals of roasted horse meat, eaten with solemn ritual. Imagine drifting off to sleep after gnawing on a leg of horse. Your dreams would gallop whether you liked it or not. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly feasted as frequently as the sagas claim, or whether these accounts are literary exaggerations meant to glorify their culture. Some scholars believe nightly feasting was rare, reserved for victories or important rituals. Others argue that, in long winters where days blurred, gathering at night was common, a way of survival as much as celebration. The debate rages, leaving you to sip your mead and wonder whether this night you witness is typical or exceptional. You notice the details. The benches are covered with rough furs, still carrying the musky scent of the animals they once belonged to. Shields hang from the walls, their paint flaking, but still proud. The fire crackles, releasing an occasional hiss when fat drips into the flames. A skald, part poet, part historian, stands near the hearth, his voice rising above the noise as he recites tales of gods and warriors. The hall hushes, the words weaving a spell, until the punchline of a heroic blunder makes everyone roar with laughter. You take a bite of smoked herring, its salt sharp on your tongue, and think about sleep. Where, in all this chaos, do these people rest? Some curl in corners, wrapped in cloaks, their heads on rolled-up tunics. Others stumble outside, lying beneath the stars despite the chill. Children tuck against their mothers, lulled by the rise and fall of drunken songs. There are no tidy bedrooms here, no oil lamps shaped like dolphins, no papyrus manuals promising guidance in dreams. Sleep arrives when it must, claimed from the margins of noise. There is humor in the chaos. You imagine a Viking warrior, enormous and fierce, collapsing mid-song and snoring so loudly that the skald pauses his tale until the rhythm of snores can be folded into the meter. The thought makes you smile, though you quickly glance at the sleeper's axe and decide not to laugh too loudly. Outside, the northern night deepens. The sky spreads like black velvet, pierced by glittering stars. Sometimes, the aurora ripples overhead, green and ghostly, as if gods themselves are keeping watch. Those who wander from the hall to relieve themselves pause, awestruck, their breath fogging in the frozen air. For them, the night sky is not just backdrop, but part of their mythology, a reminder that Odin, Thor, and Loki never truly sleep. The scholarly debate expands in your mind. Some argue that feasts were a way of organizing labor, keeping morale high after brutal work. Others claim they were political theater, designed to display wealth and bind loyalty. Perhaps both are true. What is certain is that these nights stretched on, hours filled with clashing horns, pounding feet, and voices rising into the rafters until exhaustion finally smothered the flames. The bread you carry feels absurd here. Viking loaves were dense, baked on stones, sometimes flavored with seeds or even seaweed. Yours, heavy with suspicion of hidden rocks, might have passed for authentic fare. You picture yourself trading it for a slice of roasted fish, or perhaps dunking it into a bowl of thick stew, and almost laugh. Bread, once again, keeps you tethered to every era, no matter how strange. As the feast continues, you notice how the rhythm of the hall mirrors the segmented sleep of the monks, the dream manuals of Egypt, the lantern markets of China. Every culture bends night differently. For the Vikings, darkness was not silence, but opportunity. For stories, for food, for binding together against. The night grows quieter as you leave behind the raucous laughter of the Viking hall. The echoes of mead-filled songs fade into the sea's steady roar, and the path before you narrows, lined with pine trees that sway gently in the wind. The stars above seem sharper here, colder, as though the sky itself has changed. Your feet press against smoother stones now, carved deliberately, as though someone meant the path to be calm and precise. Soon, the faint silhouette of a wooden house appears, its roof curved and neat, lanterns hanging from its eaves. Welcome to Japan, where the art of rest was shaped not by feathers or furs, but by something harder, stranger, and perhaps less restful than you expect. The pillow stone. You slide open the thin door and step inside. The room is spare, its tatami mats woven tight, the smell of straw sweet and faint. A scroll hangs on the wall, painted with a single brushstroke of ink, suggesting a mountain or a wave. The light is dim, a soft glow from a single oil lamp. In the corner, laid neatly on the floor, is the bedding. A thin futon, folded with precision, and beside it, the object of curiosity. A small ceramic block, polished smooth, with a slight curve across the top. This, you realize, is the makura, the pillow stone. Mainstream fact. For centuries in Japan, people used hard pillows, made from ceramic, lacquered wood, or even bamboo. The goal was not comfort in the sense you know it, but preservation. A person's carefully styled hair, particularly elaborate coiffures for women, could last longer if supported by a solid, unmoving surface. To sleep on a soft pillow was to risk flattening the artistry painstakingly arranged during the day. Imagine enduring an entire night with your head balanced on something like a brick, all for the sake of hair. The quirky detail is the invention of protective stands. Women often placed small boxes beside their heads, filled with bells or weighted sand. If their heads slipped from the pillow stone, the sound or jolt would wake them instantly, saving their hairstyle from ruin. It is, perhaps, the earliest version of an alarm system, though this one punished you for rolling too far. You can almost picture it now, drifting into a dream, shifting slightly, and then, clang, startling awake to find your bun still intact. Sleep hygiene, in this context, took on a rather literal meaning. Historians still argue whether these pillow stones were truly widespread among ordinary people, or mostly a practice of the wealthier classes who could afford elaborate hairstyles. Some accounts suggest everyone, from peasants to nobles, used some form of hard pillow. Others claim the common folk were far more practical, resting on folded cloths or straw bundles. The truth may be that the makura was both functional and symbolic, a cultural standard that varied by household, but which left enough artifacts behind to baffle modern sleepers. You kneel beside the futon, curious. The ceramic pillow is cool beneath your palm, its surface almost slippery. You lower your head gently, trying to imagine drifting off this way. The weight of your skull presses against the unyielding curve, and you quickly understand why historians use the word discipline to describe this tradition. Yet as you lie still, your neck slowly adjusting, a strange calm settles in. Perhaps the stillness is itself the point. No tossing, no rolling, just surrender to gravity and silence. Around you, the night presses close. Outside, the rustle of bamboo leaves whispers like rain. Even in dry air, a cicada chirps, steady and rhythmic. Inside, the lamp flickers, casting long, trembling shadows against the wall. A woman lies beside you on her own futon, her hair arranged high, her head resting as still as a statue. Her breathing is soft, steady, almost in time with the cicada. Children nearby curl on smaller mats, their heads pillowed not on stone, but on folded cloth. Proof that practicality won at least part of the night. You find humor in the thought. Imagine explaining to a modern mattress company that you are marketing a ceramic block as the next big innovation in sleep. Yes, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but think of your hairstyle. Somehow, you doubt the slogan would sell many units. And yet, the practice endured. Travelers carried small, portable makura with them, wrapped in cloth. Some were even carved with decorative patterns, a reminder that beauty mattered even in the moments unseen. A few designs contained small compartments, doubling as storage boxes for personal items, like a bedside drawer compressed into the shape of a brick. You think about your own nightstand, cluttered with books, glasses, maybe a phone, and realize the same instinct existed then. Keep what matters close, even in sleep. The scholarly debate stretches further. Some researchers argue that these pillows were more than practical. They were symbolic, linking sleep to discipline, order, and aesthetic control. Others believe they were simply utilitarian, a solution to a hairstyle problem that happened to become tradition. The lack of consensus makes you wonder if future historians will argue about your memory foam mattress, puzzling over whether you valued comfort, status, or simply marketing. You close your eyes again, balanced carefully on the stone. Slowly, you sense how it might work. The stiffness keeps you still. The stillness eases your mind. You drift, half awake, half dreaming, into a space where the rustle of bamboo blends with the rhythm of breath. Perhaps you think sleep is not always about softness. Sometimes it is about the art of surrender. Yet you cannot help but chuckle. If a Viking stumbled in here, drunk from midnight mead, and saw you balancing your head on a ceramic block, he would laugh so hard he might drop his axe. Different worlds, different nights, different ways of surrendering to the inevitable pull of fatigue. The bread you still carry rests by your side, out of place once again. You imagine nibbling it here, dipping it into miso broth, pairing it with pickled. The bamboo rustles fade, and the cool calm of the pillow stone gives way to a different kind of night. You lift your head, the weight of ceramic no longer pressing your neck, and step back into streets paved with uneven stones. The air is cooler here, edged with the smell of smoke and damp earth. A distant bell tolls, deep, deliberate, echoing through alleyways like a stern reminder. You have arrived in Elizabethan England, where curfews were not just a suggestion, but a command, and where the night belonged less to dreams and more to silence imposed by law. You walk slowly through the lanes of a small town, the timbered houses leaning toward each other as if sharing secrets overhead. Windows are shuttered tight, candles extinguished after the bell's final stroke. The streets, once lively with merchants and children, are eerily empty. Only the sound of your own footsteps carries, and even that feels dangerous, as though someone might throw open a door and scold you for daring to walk past curfew. The loaf under your arm feels heavier here, as though it too knows this is no place for wandering. Mainstream fact. In Elizabethan England, especially in towns and cities, curfews were a common tool of governance. The evening bell signaled that fires should be raked over, lights doused, and citizens indoors. The word itself, curfew, comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. The risk of flames spreading through tightly packed wooden houses was immense, and authorities believed strict rules could protect entire neighborhoods from burning in the night. The quirky detail is how people sometimes cheated the system. Instead of fully extinguishing their hearth, families would carefully cover the embers with ashes, keeping a faint glow alive. In the morning, they would uncover it, coaxing the coals back into flame. To admit you had done this was technically breaking the rule, but in practice, everyone preferred not to relight a fire from scratch each day. It was the 16th century equivalent of leaving your computer on sleep mode rather than shutting it down entirely. Historians still argue whether these curfews were obeyed as strictly as the records suggest. Some scholars believe ordinary people often ignored them, lighting candles behind shutters, whispering stories long after the bell. Others argue that the fear of punishment and the very real danger of fire kept most households compliant. Evidence from court cases shows both sides. Some fined for disobedience, others celebrated for diligence. The truth, as usual, rests somewhere in between, flickering like a dying ember. You pause beneath the tolling bell tower, feeling the vibration through the stones under your feet. The air smells faintly of soot, the ghost of dozens of fireplaces smothered in haste. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, quickly hushed by its master. The silence is not peaceful but heavy, enforced, as though the whole town has agreed to hold its breath until dawn. Inside one of the houses, you picture a family gathered close. The father stirs the last coals, carefully smothering them with ash. The mother tucks the youngest child beneath a rough wool blanket, her hands cracked from a day at the wash tub. Older children whisper, not yet ready for sleep, but too afraid to light another candle. They giggle softly, imagining ghosts outside, until a sharp look from their father silences them. The night stretches long when you are forbidden to fill it with noise. There is humor here, too, if you look sideways. Imagine a young apprentice sneaking out after curfew to meet someone, only to be caught not by the watch, but by tripping over a pig in the street. The punishment? Not only a fine, but also the humiliation of explaining to his master why he was out at midnight with pig slop on his shoes. Sleep, in such a case, would be the least of his concerns. You lean against a wall, feeling the rough timber press into your shoulder. The bread under your arm seems oddly symbolic here, legal to bake by day, suspicious if carried openly at night. Perhaps someone would accuse you of stealing it. Perhaps someone would laugh and tell you to hide it under your cloak. Either way, its presence ties you back to the rhythm of daily life. the ordinary sustenance that laws tried, and often failed, to control. As you wander further, you realize how different this enforced silence is from the chaos of the Viking hall or the glow of Chinese lantern markets. Here, night is not celebration, but danger. It is to be contained, domesticated, folded into the rhythm of labor and law. Dreams, if they come, are squeezed into narrow spaces between commands. Cover your fire, close your door, stay still until morning. And yet, even here, the human instinct for defiance flickers. Somewhere, behind a shuttered window, a candle is lit. A man scribbles notes by its glow, perhaps a merchant tallying debts, perhaps a poet shaping lines that will one day be recited aloud. Somewhere else, two lovers whisper, daring to meet in shadows. Sleep is delayed, reshaped, stretched across rules. The scholarly debate about curfews touches more than safety. Some argue they were tools of social control, designed less to prevent fires and more to keep people from plotting, meeting, or rebelling under cover of night. Others insist the danger of flames was reason enough, given how quickly towns could be destroyed. You picture both arguments as though they were actors on a stage, each insisting their truth is the only one, while the real night outside remains indifferent. As you continue walking, the moon breaks through clouds, spilling pale light across the silent street. The houses gleam faintly, their whitewashed walls reflecting the glow. You hear the creak of a cartwheel, abandoned until morning, and the faint drip of water from a gutter. The silence stretches, but you sense the restlessness beneath it. The town may be quiet, but its dreams are not. A smile touches your lips as you think again of the monks waking at midnight, the Egyptians scribbling dreams, the Romans smearing soot on their eyelids, the Vikings gnawing horse meat. Now, in Elizabethan England, the story shifts once more. No midnight feast, no dream temple, just the dull press of rules. And yet, even here, the night is alive with the faint hum of human defiance. The silence of curfew drifts away behind you, swallowed by distance, and the air changes once more. You catch a sharper scent now, something roasted, earthy, and bitter. The faint murmur of voices follows, low but insistent, and then grows louder as you approach a cluster of lamps glowing against the night. You step inside and find yourself in an Ottoman coffee house where sleep is not respected but defied, and where the drink in your cup is as much a symbol of rebellion as it is a cure for drowsiness. The door creaks, and you are greeted by a wave of sound, men debating loudly, dice clattering on wooden tables, the scrape of chairs on tile floors. The smell of coffee is everywhere, thick and slightly acrid, curling from brass pots set directly into glowing embers. The walls are stained dark from smoke, and lanterns sway gently, throwing warm, golden patches of light across the room. In the corner, a musician plucks at a stringed instrument, his notes weaving between voices without ever silencing them. Mainstream fact. By the 16th century, coffee houses had sprung up across the Ottoman Empire, especially in cities like Istanbul, Damascus, and Cairo. They were centers of social life, where men gathered to drink kava, play games, share stories, and discuss politics. For many, these spaces became more important than mosques or markets, the unofficial heartbeat of the city at night. The quirky detail is the suspicion with which authorities viewed them. Some leaders feared that people gathered in coffee houses to conspire, to criticize rulers, and to spread dangerous ideas. Edicts were issued banning them, sometimes declaring coffee itself sinful. Yet no matter how many times officials shut the doors, new coffee houses opened. People simply could not give up their nightly rituals of steaming cups and endless talk. You imagine a stern guard scolding a crowd for drinking beans boiled in water, while secretly wondering if he could sneak a sip himself. Historians still argue whether coffee houses were truly revolutionary hubs or simply places of leisure. Some scholars insist they fueled dissent, pointing to moments where political plots were indeed hatched over steaming cups. Others argue that the majority of patrons came for gossip, games, and the small thrill of staying awake past curfew. The debate continues, with coffee houses remembered both as threats to order and as harmless refuges from daily toil. You settle into a wooden chair, the surface worn smooth by countless visitors. A small cup is placed in front of you, its rim delicate, the liquid inside black and steaming. You lift it, and the aroma strikes you first. Sharp, earthy, almost smoky. The first sip is strong, bitter enough to make you wince, but then it settles, warming you from throat to stomach. Suddenly, your eyelids, heavy from travel and curfews, feel less burdened. You understand instantly why this drink was both adored and geared. The room buzzes with energy. At one table, two men argue over poetry, voices rising until one slams his palm on the table, scattering dice across the floor. At another, a storyteller spins tales of warriors and djinn, his audience leaning close, their cups forgotten for the moment. The hum of conversation creates a rhythm all its own, steady as a drumbeat, pulsing with the life of a city that refuses to surrender to sleep. You notice details that ground the scene. The brass pots, their long handles blackened from fire. The painted tiles on the walls, chipped, but still bright with blues and greens. The smell of tobacco, carried on the breath of men who pass around long pipes. Smoke curling like ghostly threads toward the ceiling. Someone laughs loudly, spilling his drink, and the liquid stains the wood a deeper brown, one of countless marks left by nights just like this. A moment of humor rises in your mind. Imagine an Ottoman official trying to convince people to give up coffee by declaring it unhealthy. The patrons nod politely, then immediately order another round, reasoning that if sin tastes this good, perhaps it is worth the risk. Your own modern complaints about caffeine jitters suddenly feel tame compared to centuries of authorities panicking over boiled beans. The bread you carry sits awkwardly on the table beside your cup. Here, coffee is paired with sweets, small pastries soaked in honey, sticky and delicate. You picture yourself dipping the crust into your drink, though the thought makes nearby patrons chuckle. They shake their heads, offering you something sweeter, and you quickly learn that coffee is not to be sullied by stones of bread, real or metaphorical. The scholarly debate resurfaces in your thoughts. Were these houses genuine threats to rulers, or did paranoia exaggerate their danger? The answer is tangled in history, like smoke in rafters. Certainly, some revolts found their first whispers here. But it is equally true that countless nights passed without rebellion, filled only with dice games and laughter. Perhaps that is the very point. The authorities feared not just politics, but the power of ordinary people gathering, awake together, refusing to fade into silence. You finish your cup, the ground's thick at the bottom, like mud left after a rain. Some say fortunes can be read in these patterns, that the future reveals itself in the swirls and clumps. You tilt the cup slightly, watching the ground slide, and wonder what they predict for you. More sleepless nights? More wandering streets of history? The thought makes you smile. The music in the corner swells for a moment, then fades. The room hushes, not in silence, but in a lull, the energy settling into something softer. A few men doze in their chairs, heads nodding despite the caffeine. Others lean closer to whisper jokes, their laughter muffled. You realize that even in defiance of sleep, fatigue always finds a way. Outside, the night is cooler. The narrow streets of the city are alive with faint echoes of voices, with lamps glowing faintly in doorways. Somewhere, a guard patrols, shaking his head at the thought of men awake when they should be home. Somewhere else, a merchant counts coins by candlelight, deciding whether tomorrow he will risk another visit to the coffee house. You carry your bread once more, though its weight feels less important now, dwarfed by the bitter aftertaste still clinging to your tongue. Ahead, you sense another chapter of night waiting, not fueled by coffee, but controlled by kings. The coffee house hum fades behind you, its laughter and arguments dissolving into the dark, and the streets grow narrow again. The lamps dwindle, the air feels colder, and you realize you are stepping into a city where even light is not free. The faint glow ahead is not generous, not warm, but careful and measured, as though each flicker of flame must be justified. You are in France now, wandering through the age when kings discovered they could tax not only bread, salt, and bodies, but even the candles that kept night at bay. The houses lean tall and close, their shutters drawn, their hearths glowing faintly behind the cracks. You notice how few windows glow with light, and how those that do seem guilty, shuttered tight to keep their brightness from spilling into the street. It feels less like a city asleep and more like a city hiding. You stop beneath an archway, the smell of wax faint in the air, and listen. Somewhere, a voice mutters. A child fusses, and then silence again. The quiet here is not peace, it is economy. Mainstream fact. In 17th and 18th century France, candles and other sources of artificial light were heavily taxed. The monarchy sought revenue from every necessity, and light was no exception. The candle tax was not merely about money. It became symbolic of royal greed and the burden placed on common households. Families rationed their candles carefully, often limiting themselves to one for the entire evening. The wealthy could afford chandeliers of beeswax, while the poor stumbled through the dark with a single sputtering taper. The quirky detail lies in the tricks people used to stretch their light. Some burned rushlights, thin stalks of plants dipped in animal fat, that guttered quickly but cost less than candles. Others snuffed flames early, teaching themselves to sit together in near darkness, speaking softly, while the faint red glow of the hearth provided just enough to see by. Children sometimes carved shapes into thin slices of horn and placed them in front of candles to scatter the light further, a primitive lampshade meant to fool shadows into stretching longer. Historians still argue whether the candle tax truly altered daily life in profound ways, or whether it was just one burden among many that symbolized larger inequalities. Some claim it pushed families into bed earlier, changing sleep patterns across entire regions. Others suggest the effect was minimal, absorbed by households already used to stretching resources. Either way, the image remains vivid. Night shaped not only by fatigue, but by finance. You picture yourself inside one of these homes. The room is narrow, its beams low, its walls hung with drying herbs. A single candle flickers on the table, its wax dripping steadily into a dish. A family leans close around it. Father mending tools, mother sewing, children whispering lessons by rote. The flame trembles each time the door rattles with wind. No one dares waste another candle if this one falters. When it finally gutters, they will shuffle to bed in the dark, their eyes already adjusted, their tasks unfinished. The wealthy, of course, lived differently. In the great houses of Paris, salons glowed with beeswax candles stacked in silver candelabras. Guests gathered in powdered wigs, sipping chocolate or wine, while musicians played soft pieces. The wax burned brightly, the scent sweet, the shadows sharp and theatrical. Here, light was abundance, a display of wealth as much as taste. The candle tax meant little when your purse was deep, and if anyone complained, they did so for sport, not necessity. The divide between rich and poor was never more visible than in the glow of night. A moment of humor slips into your thoughts. Imagine a poor villager scolded by an official for burning too many candles, only to retort, "Oh, forgive me, I thought the king might want me to see my stew before I ate it." You doubt the official laughed, but you smile at the image anyway. The absurdity of measuring light in coins makes your own gripes about electric bills feel like distant echoes. The bread you still carry rests against your side, oddly symbolic here. Bread and light were often paired in complaints. No bread for the stomach, no candle for the night. Both became shorthand for the heavy hand of taxes. You picture yourself placing the loaf beside the dwindling flame, the two essentials of survival pressed together, each rationed carefully, each a reminder of limits imposed by distant authority. As you walk further, the streets grow darker. The only light comes from the moon, silver and thin, spilling across rooftops. A patrol passes, lanterns swinging, their glow small and stingy. You pull your cloak tighter and step into the shadows, imagining the countless households forced into premature slumber, their lives shaped by wax and coins. The silence feels heavier than Elizabethan curfews or Ottoman suspicion. Here, it is not law that enforces stillness, but poverty. The scholarly debate continues in your mind. Did the candle tax encourage earlier bedtimes and thus reshape European notions of sleep, or were people already accustomed to darkness? Some argue that the tax accelerated a culture of frugality, pushing families to adapt by rising earlier with the sun. Others dismiss it as a minor irritation, overshadowed by larger struggles. You suspect the truth lies, as always, in the flicker of both arguments, small flames burning simultaneously, each illuminating part of the picture. Inside another home, you imagine a young writer hunched close to the flame, his quill scratching furiously while wax drips dangerously close to his sleeve. Perhaps he spends an entire week's allowance on candles just to finish his draft. Perhaps his words will never be read. Swallowed by the last of the French candlelight fades behind you, and the city melts into the blackness of open water. The air grows saltier, damp, and sharp against your throat. You hear creaking timbers and the low groan of ropes straining against masts. The sea, restless and eternal, stretches around you, and above, the sky is filled with cold stars. A ship drifts across the waves, its sails dark shapes against the horizon. You step aboard, the deck slick with brine, and the rocking immediately sets your stomach swaying. Here, in the cramped quarters of sailors and pirates, sleep becomes a matter of survival, claimed in snatches, stolen between storms, and taken in swaying hammocks that creak like uneasy cradles. The deck is busy even at night. Lanterns swing from beams, their light trembling across faces weathered by salt and wind. Men coil ropes, repair sails, or simply lean against the rail, eyes fixed on the horizon. You descend below deck, and the smell hits you first. Wood soaked with seawater, tar, unwashed clothes, and something sharp, metallic, like rusting nails. The space is narrow, beams low, the air stale. Rows of hammocks stretch from wall to wall, each one a swaying cocoon. Some are empty, waiting for the next shift of men to crawl into them. Others sway with bodies already collapsed inside, their breaths ragged, their snores merging with the groan of the ship. Mainstream fact: by the 16th century, sailors across navies and pirate crews alike used hammocks as standard sleeping arrangements at sea. Suspended from beams, hammocks prevented sailors from being tossed onto the floor during storms, cradling them with the ship's motion. They were space efficient too, easy to hang and stow, allowing crowded crews to rest in shifts. The quirky detail is how poorly these hammocks aged. They absorbed sweat, salt, and grime, becoming breeding grounds for lice and fleas. Sailors sometimes joked that the hammocks rocked them to sleep, not with comfort, but with sheer exhaustion, since the itch of insects rarely allowed true rest. On long voyages, hammocks grew so filthy they could practically stand upright when removed, stiff with dirt. Yet they remained the sailor's most precious possession, rolled carefully and guarded fiercely. For without one, you slept on hard planks that bruised every bone. Historians still argue whether pirate crews truly enjoyed more freedom and equality in their nightly routines compared to Navy sailors. Some claim pirate ships allowed flexible watches and longer rest, citing their democratic structures. Others counter that the chaos of piracy meant more sleepless nights, more readiness for sudden battle. The debate lingers, much like the smell in the hold, stubborn and hard to dispel. You stand among the hammocks, listening. The wood creaks, the sails above snap faintly, and every sound seems amplified in the darkness. Yeah. A man mutters in his sleep, his fingers twitching as though still tying knots. Another coughs, the sound hacking and wet. Someone laughs softly, half dreaming, and then falls silent. The rocking grows heavier as a wave crashes against the hull, and the hammocks sway together, like a chorus of pendulums. You imagine climbing into one yourself. The canvas is rough beneath your hands, frayed at the edges, but surprisingly sturdy. You lower yourself in carefully, the hammock tipping dangerously until you find your balance. The motion is strange at first, your stomach lurching, but slowly it steadies, the sway matching the rhythm of the ship. Your body begins to understand, and for a moment, you feel cradled, as though the sea itself has accepted you. And yet, rest is never guaranteed. A storm could erupt at any hour, forcing men from hammocks to the deck, rain pelting, waves smashing, or worse, the cry of "Sails ahead!" could send them scrambling for weapons, the promise of battle overriding any thought of slumber. For sailors, sleep was always provisional, always subject to the demands of wind, weather, and war. You find humor in the thought of hammocks rocking too well. Imagine a sailor so unused to the sway that he tumbles out in the middle of the night, landing on a neighbor and setting off a chain of curses. The hammocks sway, the ship sways, and soon the men are laughing despite themselves. Even in the harshest life, humor found its way through. The bread you carry sits awkwardly here, out of place among salted pork and ship's biscuit. You picture yourself offering it to a sailor, who eyes it suspiciously before breaking off a piece and chewing cautiously. If he finds a stone baked inside, he might shrug, declaring it no worse than weevils crawling through his biscuit. Hunger made tolerances wide at sea, and a stone was almost less offensive than biting into something alive. Above deck, the moon shines bright on the waves. The ship rolls, the water glitters, and the men who stand watch fight fatigue with songs and quiet chatter. Below, the hammocks sway, holding bodies that twitch in restless dreams. Some dream of home, of fields and wives. Others dream of treasure, of gold piled high. A few, perhaps, dream of nothing at all, too weary for even visions. the scholarly debate rises again in your mind. Some argue that sailors lived in a state of chronic sleep deprivation, worn down by constant watch rotations. Others claim their bodies adapted, learning to rest deeply in short bursts, rocked by the motion of the ship. Both may be true, depending on the voyage. What is certain is that sleep at sea was never restful in the way you know it. It was a negotiation with chaos, a fragile truce with the sea. You climb out of the hammock, feeling the stiffness in your limbs, and step back onto the deck. The night air is sharp, filled with salt. A gull cries somewhere in the distance, though you cannot see it. The horizon is faint, a dark line against darker sky. You breathe deeply, and for a moment you imagine the lives of those who spent years on these waters, their dreams confined to swaying cloth, their nights stretched endlessly across shifting waves. The bread is still in your arm, stubborn as all. The sea fades behind you, its rhythm of waves and hammocks left rocking in memory. Your feet find solid earth again, damp grass giving way to packed soil, and the air is different now. Still, cool, touched with wood smoke rising from chimneys. The faint sound of a cock crowing tells you it is not yet morning, yet the world is awake in its own quiet way. Ahead, you see a cottage with shutters slightly open, light spilling into the night. You step closer and realize you have arrived in the age of the two-sleep pattern, a world where families did not slumber straight through the night, but divided it, slipping in and out of wakefulness as naturally as breathing. You push the door gently, and inside you find a single room, warmed by a smoldering hearth. A family stirs within. Children are rubbing their eyes, not because dawn has come, but because midnight has. And this is the waking time between their first and second sleeps. The father sits by the fire, mending a tool by its faint glow. The mother hums softly as she spins wool, her hand steady, though her body sways with fatigue. One child kneels in prayer, whispering words half-learned, half-dreamed. Another child sits up and asks for water, sipping carefully before crawling back beneath the rough blanket. This waking moment, short but steady, belongs to them as much as sleep does. Mainstream fact. For centuries, especially in Europe and colonial America, people often followed a segmented sleep pattern. They went to bed shortly after dusk, slept for several hours, then woke naturally around midnight. This waking period could last 1 or 2 hours, filled with prayer, small chores, visits to neighbors, or even quiet moments of reflection. Afterward, they returned to bed for their second sleep, resting until dawn. The quirky detail is how casually people used this time for socializing. Diaries and court records describe neighbors visiting each other at midnight, carrying lanterns through dark lanes as though it were perfectly ordinary. Imagine hearing a knock on your door at 1 o'clock in the morning, only to find your neighbor standing there with a grin, saying, "Thought I'd pop in for a chat." In their world, this was not suspicious, but expected. A way to fill the quiet gap between rests. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universal, or whether it varied greatly by region and class. Some argue nearly everyone lived by it, citing letters and journals that mention first sleep and second sleep as common phrases. Others believe it was more localized, common in rural areas, but less so in cities where artificial light stretched evenings longer. The debate continues, with some suggesting the pattern faded only as clocks and industry reshaped human schedules. You sit by the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into your hands. The bread you carry rests in your lap, heavy but comforting. You break off a piece and imagine dipping it into a bowl of broth, sharing with the family around you. They nod, grateful, and continue their quiet tasks. The father hammers gently, sparks rising with each strike. The mother twists wool into thread, her fingers nimble despite the hour. The children whisper, giggle, then fall back into silence. The rhythm is calm, unhurried, as though the night itself has expanded to allow room for both wakefulness and rest. Outside, the village is not asleep either. A lantern flickers down the lane, carried by a neighbor on his way to visit. Another glow comes from a barn, where someone is checking livestock. Dogs bark faintly, then quiet again. The world hums softly, a chorus of small sounds, all bound by the shared understanding that midnight is not the end, but the middle. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, imagining how your own life would change if this rhythm returned. No frantic scrolling of glowing screens at midnight, but purposeful tasks, writing letters, tending fires, whispering prayers. You might rise without guilt, work quietly, then slip back into slumber without feeling robbed. It is tempting to think that humans were meant for this, that our bodies have not forgotten the pattern even now. A light humor edges into your thoughts. Picture explaining to a modern friend that you woke at midnight to mend your socks, then went back to bed. They would likely suggest stronger coffee, not realizing you were simply keeping to tradition. In truth, the midnight wake seems almost practical, a natural intermission in the play of sleep. The scholarly debate expands further. Some researchers believe segmented sleep allowed deeper dreams, since the waking period created contrast that made the second stretch more vivid. Others argue it was simply necessity, born of darkness and limited light, with no mystical benefits. Letters from the time describe both, people waking with ease, drifting back contentedly, and people complaining of restless nights. You suspect, as always, that both are true. The cottage grows quieter again. The father sets aside his tool. The mother yawns. The children curl into each other. The embers in the hearth glow red, throwing soft light across the beams overhead. You sense the moment has come. The family will return to bed for their second sleep. One by one, they stretch, shuffle, and sink beneath blankets. Soon, their breathing grows steady, the sound of rest filling the room. You rise gently, stepping outside into the night. The lane is empty now, the last lantern fading in the distance. The stars glimmer, the air smells faintly of hay, and you feel the deep stillness of a world at half rest. You imagine the hours ahead, the second sleep, richer, and the quiet village slips behind you, its shutters sealed, its people sinking into their second sleep. Ahead, the night grows sharper, filled not with the soft glow of hearths, but with a metallic edge, a hum that seems almost unnatural. You follow the sound until it becomes distinct. Bells, whistles, and the thrum of iron. The darkness is pierced by the glow of furnaces, their chimneys belching smoke, even under a starless sky. You have entered the age of industry, where night is not the property of dreams, but of factories, and where sleep itself begins to lose the rhythm it once kept. The ground beneath your boots vibrates faintly with machinery. The air smells of coal, soot, and oil, heavy enough to cling to your throat. Rows of brick buildings loom ahead, their windows glowing faintly. Through the panes, you see silhouettes bent over machines, the movement of arms rising and falling, the endless churn of wheels and gears. A whistle shrieks suddenly, so loud it rattles your teeth, summoning or dismissing another shift. The sound fades, but its echo lingers, a reminder that in this world, Sleep belongs to the clock, not the body. Mainstream fact. With the Industrial Revolution, factory bells and whistles dictated the lives of workers. Men, women, and even children rose before dawn, their hours shaped not by sun or hearth, but by rigid schedules. 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. Their time was carved into pieces by the demands of production. Sleep, once fluid and flexible, was compressed into the narrow hours left between shifts. The quirky detail is the existence of knocker-uppers, people hired to wake workers before alarm clocks were common. Armed with long sticks, they tapped on windows to rouse entire streets. Imagine being jolted awake not by the chirp of your phone, but by the sharp rap of a stranger poking at your glass. Some used pea shooters, firing dried peas at windows to be sure sleepers stirred. It was an entire profession dedicated to the denial of oversleeping. Historians still argue whether the factory system permanently rewired human sleep or simply overrode natural rhythms for a time. Some claim the forced schedules reshaped society into expecting one long block of slumber at night, erasing the two-sleep pattern. Others suggest people adapted only reluctantly, maintaining midnight waking for generations, despite industrial demands. The debate remains unsettled, lingering like the hiss of steam from the machines. You wander closer to a factory doorway. The heat radiates outward, sticky and oppressive. Inside, workers move in unison, their faces pale, their eyes hollow with fatigue. Some stifle yawns, others blink furiously, fighting sleep even as their hands continue working. The clang of hammers and the screech of gears fills the air. Relentless. Sleep here is not private but communal. Deprivation shared across rows of tired bodies. You imagine the end of a shift. Workers spill into the street, their clothes stained with soot, their hair damp with sweat. Some shuffle home in silence, too weary even to speak. Others collapse onto narrow beds, boots still on, falling into unconsciousness more than sleep. The rhythm is no longer gentle, no longer divided by choice. It is blunt, enforced, mechanical. Dreams, if they come, are short and heavy, dominated by the echoes of machinery that follow into slumber. A moment of humor sneaks in, despite the gloom. Picture a knocker-upper dozing off on the job, only to be startled awake by another knocker-upper poking his own window. Even in the dreariest times, irony finds a way. Or imagine a worker explaining to his overseer that he overslept because the pea from the knocker-upper bounced off the wrong window. Excuses, it seems, never change across centuries. The bread you carry feels heavier still, almost mocking in its symbolism. Workers in this age often lived on bread, potatoes, and little else, their wages barely stretching further. Bread was both sustenance and symbol, fuel for bodies forced into endless shifts. If your loaf carried stones, it might be indistinguishable from the reality of cheap bread stretched with filler, adulterated by bakers cutting corners. Hunger often left people with no choice but to chew grit along with their crusts. The scholarly debate deepens in your mind. Did industrial schedules strip humanity of its natural sleep forever? Or was the change temporary, a harsh interruption? Evidence points both ways. Diaries describe exhaustion so deep that people collapsed the moment they reached bed. Yet others suggest midnight waking persisted in rural areas, the old rhythm refusing to die. The tension remains unresolved, caught between the memory of segmented rest and the demands of machines. You walk further into the industrial city. The streets are lined with row houses, their windows dark despite the glow of furnaces nearby. Inside, entire families share cramped rooms. A father snores lightly on a straw mattress. A child coughs. A mother sits awake sewing by the faintest light, too afraid to waste a candle. Sleep is not sanctuary, but necessity, stolen where possible, rationed like food. Dreams rarely stretch far here. Survival narrows them. The factory bells fade behind you, their echoes trailing like ghosts of iron. The air grows clearer as you walk, less filled with soot. But it is not peace that greets you. Instead, you feel the tension of restless minds, the unease of people lying awake, staring at ceilings, begging for sleep that does not come. You have stepped into the Victorian era, a world that prided itself on invention and progress, yet found itself plagued by sleeplessness. Here, insomnia became an affliction, and the remedies promised to cure it were as strange as they were desperate. You find yourself inside a dimly lit apothecary shop, the shelves crowded with bottles. The glass glimmers faintly in lamplight, their labels promising relief. Soothing syrup, restorative draught, nerve tonic. Each one claims to hush the mind, to coax the body toward slumber. The air smells of camphor and lavender, sharp alcohol mingling with sugar syrups. Behind the counter, a man in a long coat explains in a steady voice how just a spoonful at night will bring peaceful dreams. You pick up a bottle and read its ingredients: opium, alcohol, perhaps even chloroform. It is less bedtime story and more chemical surrender. Mainstream fact: in Victorian times, insomnia was widely discussed as both a medical condition and a social problem. Doctors prescribed a dizzying array of treatments: opiates, bromides, alcohol mixtures, and later even early barbiturates. Hypnosis gained popularity too, as some physicians believed suggestion could quiet the restless mind. Patients desperate for relief tried anything, often trading one problem for another. The quirky detail is the invention of magnetic belts and electric sleep machines. Some Victorians believed that electricity, newly harnessed, could reset the nervous system. Belts fitted with wires and batteries were strapped around the body, sending tiny shocks through the skin in hopes of forcing slumber. Others swore by machines that emitted faint hums or vibrations, meant to lull the brain into sleep. Imagine lying in bed with a buzzing contraption strapped to your chest, telling yourself this is science, while secretly wondering if you are roasting yourself like a Sunday chicken. Historians still argue whether Victorian insomnia was truly more common or simply more discussed. Some suggest industrial schedules, urban noise, and artificial light created new sleep disorders. Others argue that sleeplessness has always plagued humans, but the Victorians, with their fascination for medicalization, simply labeled and diagnosed it more publicly. The debate continues, tangled in diaries, prescriptions, and the endless testimonies of the sleepless. You step further into the shop and notice advertisements pinned to the wall. One poster shows a pale woman lying in bed, eyes wide, the headline reading, "Do you suffer from nervous wakefulness?" Another promises that a simple tonic will banish nightmares forever. The language is both soothing and threatening. If you cannot sleep, you are ill, and if you are ill, you must buy the cure. Outside the shop, the streets of London are restless too. Carriages rattle over cobblestones, gas lamps hiss faintly, and in some windows, candles burn far into the night. You glance up and see a man pacing back and forth behind the glass, his hands clasped behind his back, his face pale with exhaustion. In another window, a woman sits hunched over a book, not reading but staring, her eyes refusing to close. The city does not sleep, and neither do many of its inhabitants. A smile touches your lips as you imagine the oddity of some cures. One doctor insisted that insomnia could be treated by drinking lettuce water, essentially steeping the leaves like tea. Another recommended walking barefoot in dew at dawn. Others claimed a strict diet of plain porridge at night would cure everything. You can almost hear a weary Victorian muttering, "I tried the porridge, and now I am simply tired and hungry." Even then, people were skeptical, though desperation kept them trying. The bread you carry rests heavy in your arm, and here it feels almost ironic. Victorians sometimes advised eating small snacks before bed, milk, bread, or broth, to settle the stomach. Your loaf, suspicious though it may be, would have been seen as medicinal, at least by those who believed sleep could be coaxed through diet. You picture yourself offering it to the pacing man in the window, suggesting he eat a slice before lying down. He might thank you, or he might throw it at the wall in frustration. The scholarly debate deepens. Was Victorian insomnia primarily caused by industrialization, stress, and artificial light? Or was it simply the medical lens, turning sleeplessness into pathology? Some argue the era's obsession with discipline and productivity left people anxious, unable to rest. Others counter that diaries from earlier centuries show the same complaints, proving insomnia is timeless. The arguments themselves feel restless, circling endlessly like the very condition they discuss. You wander into a parlor where a hypnotist performs. A small audience watches as he speaks softly to a woman in a chair, urging her eyelids to grow heavy. Her head droops, her breathing slows, and the crowd murmurs. The hypnotist proclaims she will sleep peacefully tonight. Whether she does, no one knows, but the promise is enough to fill the room with hope. Later, you step into a bedroom. The bed is wide, draped in heavy curtains to block drafts. A woman lies stiffly, her eyes open. On her bedside table sits a bottle of tonic, half empty, and a small electric belt, wires dangling. She sighs, pulls the curtains tighter, and waits for sleep to come. The gas lamp flickers, the shadows shift, and the hours crawl. The fog of Victorian streets fades, thinning into cold mist that clings to grass and soil. The ground beneath your boots feels softer now, uneven, scarred by trenches carved into earth. The air is sharp with the scent of mud, smoke, and something metallic that lingers no matter how much rain falls. A faint hum of voices drifts through the dark, not cheerful like a coffee house or bustling like a market, but low, tired, and fragile. You have stepped into the night of the First World War, where soldiers crouch in narrow dugouts and learn to sing lullabies against the thunder of artillery. The trench is narrow, its walls slick with mud. Boards are laid along the bottom, though water still pools in shallow puddles. Sandbags pile overhead, blocking some of the cold night air, but doing little to muffle the distant booms. Soldiers huddle in coats that never seem warm enough, their boots heavy with mud, their faces pale and hollowed. Some stare ahead, eyes glazed, while others hum softly, the notes trembling as though afraid to rise too loudly. Mainstream fact. Soldiers in the trenches often slept in short, broken intervals, grabbing rest whenever the guns fell quiet. Conditions were brutal, wet, crowded, filled with lice and rats. Sleep was rarely peaceful, interrupted by fear of sudden attacks or the deafening noise of shell fire. For many, lullabies and songs became survival tools, soothing both themselves and their comrades when silence felt unbearable. The quirky detail is how familiar children's songs reappeared here. Soldiers sang old nursery rhymes, soft tunes from their childhood, repurposed as shields against fear. One group might hum "Rock-a-bye Baby," another a local folk melody. The sound, fragile and trembling, drifted across the mud as though daring the war to listen. Some even composed their own verses, darkly humorous, turning tragedy into rhyme just to keep despair at bay. You imagine a young soldier whispering a lullaby to himself, half a prayer, half a joke, while shells explode above. Historians still argue whether singing truly eased soldiers' suffering, or whether it was merely a distraction, a way to fill unbearable silence. Some memoirs describe lullabies as life-saving rituals, comforting entire units. Others dismiss them as small gestures, unable to counter trauma. The debate continues, but the image remains. Men rocking themselves into uneasy half-sleep with songs meant for cradles, not trenches. You kneel beside one soldier. He hums softly, the notes almost lost in the wind. His hands clutch a letter, its paper damp and smudged. He closes his eyes, his lips forming words too faint to hear. But you recognize the rhythm. A lullaby. The man beside him chuckles softly, joining in with a second voice, rough but steady. Soon, 3 or 4 hum together, the sound weaving like fragile thread through the dark. Their boots rest against sodden planks, their rifles lean within reach. But for a moment, they are only boys again, remembering voices of mothers, sisters, grandmothers. Above, a shell explodes in the distance, a flash of orange lighting the sky. The ground shudders, clods of mud fall, but the men keep humming. The sound is steady, stubborn, defiant. Sleep comes not as escape, but as surrender, forced by exhaustion. One soldier tilts his head against the trench wall, his mouth still murmuring the tune, even as he drifts into unconsciousness. Another leans back, his eyes closed, the lullaby fading into snores. The night continues, divided between waking fear and fragile dreams. You cannot help but find humor even here. Imagine soldiers improvising silly verses, poking fun at their commanders, or the mud itself, singing, "Hush now, boots full of water. Maybe tomorrow we'll sleep somewhere drier." Laughter breaks through, low but genuine, and even in the worst of nights, the human instinct to joke refuses to die. The bread you carry feels absurd in this place, but it makes you think. Soldiers often lived on hardtack, biscuits so tough they sometimes carved them into trinkets. Compared to that, your questionable loaf with its hidden stone might have been considered a delicacy. You picture handing it over, the men breaking it into pieces, chewing slowly, joking that at least the pebble inside gave it extra crunch. Hunger and fatigue sharpened humor until even stones became punchlines. The scholarly debate deepens. Was lullaby singing a rare practice, mentioned only in scattered diaries, or was it widespread? Some historians cite letters filled with descriptions of music, claiming it was essential for morale. Others argue the mentions are few, exaggerated by romantic memory. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps some trenches echoed with humming, while others were too battered, too broken, for song. The silence of missing records leaves the question unresolved. You rise and walk further down the trench. Lanterns flicker faintly, their glow muffled by the mud walls. A man scribbles by candlelight, his handwriting uneven as the ground shakes. Another sharpens a knife, the rasping sound steady as breath. A third sleeps sitting upright, head tipped forward, the brim of his helmet shadowing his face. Around them, the lullaby continues, a fragile thread weaving through exhaustion. Above the trench, the sky is wide and cold. Stars glitter faintly, though smoke blurs their edges. You imagine a soldier looking up, whispering the same lullaby his mother once sang, while pointing out constellations. The memory becomes a lifeline, something to hold in a world where tomorrow is never guaranteed. The bread presses against your side, as though reminding you that survival is simple and primal. The trench songs fade, carried away on damp wind, and the ground under your boots grows firmer, drier, until it feels almost weightless. The air changes too, crisper, thinner, with a faint metallic tang that hums against your teeth. Overhead, the stars shine more fiercely than they ever did on land, not blurred by smoke or soot, but sharp, bright, endless. You are no longer on earthbound soil. The path has tilted upward, leading into a new kind of night, the space age, where sleep must be strapped down, rationed, and carefully scheduled against the infinite dark. You step inside a capsule, cramped and clean, every surface lined with switches and dials. The air smells faintly recycled, filtered metal and plastic. Velcro strips cling to walls, holding pens, checklists, even toothbrushes in place. There is no bed here, no hammock slung across beams, no futon neatly folded on tatami. Instead, a nylon sleeping bag hangs against the wall, with straps running across it. To rest, astronauts climb inside, zip themselves up, and tether their bodies so they will not drift away in weightlessness. Mainstream fact. From the earliest missions onward, astronauts learned that sleep in space is unlike anything on Earth. Without gravity, bodies float freely, making pillows unnecessary and beds irrelevant. In the International Space Station, astronauts typically strap themselves into small compartments, sleeping upright or sideways, though orientation has no meaning here. They rely on schedules tightly managed by mission control, with periods of sleep carefully slotted to keep minds and reflexes sharp. The quirky detail is that some astronauts confess to missing the feeling of pressure, the weight of a blanket, the sense of lying down. To replicate it, they sometimes strap a bungee cord lightly across their bodies, tricking themselves into believing they are anchored. One even joked that without this, drifting in sleep felt too much like being a ghost haunting the space station. Imagine floating weightless, eyes closed, only to wake slowly and realize your arm is halfway across the cabin, reaching for a switch you never touched. Historians still argue whether space travel disrupted human sleep permanently, or simply revealed how fragile it already was. Some scientists claim that circadian rhythms collapse in orbit, with sunrises and sunsets passing every 90 minutes as the station circles Earth. Others argue that strict schedules and artificial lighting restore order, that astronauts adapt more quickly than expected. The debate continues, circling like the station itself, as experts sift through data on dreams and wakefulness recorded millions of miles from home. You imagine slipping into one of these sleeping bags. The straps tug gently at your shoulders. Your arms float unless you tuck them in, and your head does not rest on anything. At first, the sensation is strange, disorienting, like falling forever without ever hitting ground. But then, slowly, your muscles relax. Without the press of gravity, no part of your body aches. No mattress pushes back. It is suspension, a rest both alien and oddly pure. The cabin hums faintly with fans, keeping air moving so no pockets of carbon dioxide linger. Lights dim according to schedule, though outside the window, the sun bursts into view every hour and a half. You watch Earth roll beneath you, oceans glowing silver, continents dark and sleeping. The view alone is enough to keep you awake, your eyes wide as the curve of the planet slips past. How does one sleep when the entire world is floating under your window? There is humor even here. Astronauts sometimes laugh at photographs of themselves asleep, arms drifting upward like zombies, hair floating in halos. One admitted that waking to see a crewmate floating silently, eyes shut, looked less restful and more like a scene from a ghost story. Another joked that without gravity, snoring sounds louder, bouncing oddly in the cabin, echoing from the thin walls until everyone is awake anyway. Even in the silence of space, humanity brings its noisy quirks along. The bread you carry feels both ridiculous and poignant here. Food in space comes in sealed pouches, dehydrated, sometimes pressed into bars. Crumbs are dangerous, floating into vents or eyes. If you offered your loaf here, with its suspicious weight and potential stones, Mission Control would surely confiscate it. And yet, bread has been smuggled before. Famously, in one Gemini mission, an astronaut slipped a contraband corned beef sandwich aboard, the crumbs scattering until he sheepishly stuffed it away. Bread, once again, insists on following the night wherever humans travel. The scholarly debate stretches further. Does sleep in space teach us something about Earth? Some argue that weightlessness reveals how much of rest is habit. Blankets, beds, pillows, gravity pressing us down. Others insist it shows how much we need rhythm. Light, dark, cycles of day, to regulate our minds. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps space is a mirror, showing us how fragile and adaptable we are all at once. You float gently in the cabin, listening to the hum of machines. A crewmate drifts past, strapped in his bag, his face calm, his breath steady. Another murmurs faintly, perhaps dreaming, though no one knows how dreams change without weight. You wonder if his mind conjures earth, grass beneath his feet, the pressure of a pillow, or perhaps he dreams of stars, endless, cold, unreachable. Outside the window, Earth slips past again. A sunrise flares, dazzling, then fades into night within minutes. Your body cannot tell what hour it is. Only the schedule, the dimming of cabin lights, insists that it is time to rest. You close your eyes, tethered, floating, listening to your own breath mixing with the hum. For a moment, you almost believe you are weightless too. And yet, humor presses in again. Imagine drifting into another astronaut's sleeping bag by mistake, waking to find yourself zipped against someone who looks as startled as you. Awkward laughs, muffled apologies, and a reminder that in space, personal space, is mostly theoretical. Even the vastness of the universe cannot stop small human clumsiness. The bread drifts near you, absurdly floating, threatening to scatter crumbs. You catch it, holding it tight. It is followed from stones in medieval ovens to the silence of orbit, a reminder that no matter how far humans travel, they carry the simplest symbols of home. Bread and sleep, survival and dream, earthbound comforts that cling even in the void. The scholarly debate lingers one last time. Does space sleep weaken humans, or does it prove our resilience? Perhaps the answer is both. Here, in weightlessness, bodies struggle, yet minds adapt, strapping themselves down, humming lullabies, inventing humor in zero gravity. Sleep, as always, bends but does not break. The cabin dims again. The fans hum. Earth rolls by, glowing faintly blue. You close your eyes, anchored by straps, drifting between worlds. Tomorrow will bring more experiments, more reports, more data. But for tonight, or what passes for it, you surrender. Carried by the same need that has followed humanity from mud huts to monasteries, from markets to machines. Sleep, however fragile, still claims its place, even among the stars. The silence of space falls away, and you drift downward into a world that feels familiar, yet somehow more restless than any trench, monastery, or marketplace before. The air hums faintly, not with chants or machines, but with electricity. Screens glow in every window, in every pocket, in every restless hand. The night has not grown darker with modernity, but brighter, flooded by artificial light that turns midnight into something indistinguishable from noon. You are here in the digital sleepless age, where circadian rhythms are stolen not by kings or bells, but by the glow of devices that never rest. You walk down a suburban street, and every house leaks a faint blue haze through curtains. Inside, people lie in beds, faces lit by rectangles of light. Fingers scroll endlessly, eyes darting, minds refusing to surrender. Some watch videos, others type hurried emails. Still others glance at clocks and mutter that they will close their eyes soon. Yet minutes become hours, and the promise of rest is pushed further away. Mainstream fact. Scientists today confirm that screens emit blue light that suppresses melatonin, the hormone responsible for sleep. Exposure to phones, tablets, and laptops at night tricks the brain into believing it is still daytime, delaying rest and fragmenting slumber. Insomnia, once treated with tonics and electric belts, is now fueled by the devices meant to connect us. The quirky detail is how some people attempt to hack this problem with absurd methods. Special glasses tinted orange promise to filter blue light. Apps dim screens to a reddish glow. Others tape cardboard over device corners, convincing themselves it helps. One company even sold a pillow with built-in speakers for soothing late-night podcasts, though most customers admitted they simply listened longer, staying awake past dawn. In trying to fight sleeplessness, many accidentally embraced it more tightly. Historians still argue whether this digital age is truly unprecedented, or simply another echo of old patterns. Some say screens are a unique disruption, unlike candles or coffee houses, reshaping sleep entirely. Others argue it is the same old story. Humans finding excuses to stretch the night, whether through lantern-lit markets, taverns, or caffeinated debate. The argument hums like static, unresolved, while the glow of screens continues. You step into a bedroom. A young man lies under his blanket, his phone held inches from his face. His eyes are red, but he tells himself just 5 more minutes. Beside him, a woman scrolls too, her tablet glowing. A clock on the nightstand reads 1:30, then 2, then 3. Neither notices how quickly the hours vanish. Their bodies plead for sleep, but their minds swim in the endless stream of images, videos, and text. The bread you carry still rests under your arm, absurd in a room filled with electronics. Yet here too it feels symbolic. Once bread was rationed by kings, stones hidden by bakers, or stretched thin in factories. Now, it sits alongside digital consumption, still present, still a reminder of the body's simplest need. No matter how many screens glow, hunger for food and rest never disappears. You imagine setting the loaf down on the nightstand, Between the phone and the lamp, perhaps its weight would remind them of gravity, of the ordinary world beyond pixels. Perhaps it would not. Either way, bread, like sleep, insists quietly on being part of every era. Outside, the city pulses with light. Neon signs, billboards, and glowing windows scatter the darkness. Highways roar with cars, restaurants stay open until dawn, and offices hum with fluorescent lamps. The idea of universal night, once protected by curfews and candles, is gone. For some, this feels like liberation, the freedom to live at any hour. For others, it feels like loss, the vanishing of boundaries between day and night. A touch of humor slips into your thoughts. Imagine explaining to a monk from centuries ago that people now lose sleep, staring at glowing glass rectangles filled with cat videos. He might blink, shake his head, and say, "You left our midnight chants for this?" The absurdity is sharp, but so is the recognition that every age invents new ways to resist sleep. The scholar, now the hum of screens fades, and the long journey through centuries of night begins to settle. You step away from the glow, away from the bells, the markets, the hammocks, the trenches, even away from the tethered silence of space. What remains is only stillness, a quiet as soft as folded cloth, stretching wide across the dark. The air feels lighter here. Each breath drifts slowly, rising and falling like a tide. The ground beneath your feet softens until you no longer feel its edges. The loaf you carried all this way finally slips from your arm, resting gently on the earth, its weight no longer needed. You release it without regret, as though the journey itself has been enough. Your eyelids grow heavy. Every sound that once crowded the night, chanting, bells, laughter, whistles, explosions, has dimmed into a distant echo. The silence is not empty, but warm, like a blanket that covers without pressing. You find yourself slowing, each step longer, each thought drifting further, until even remembering feels unnecessary. Around you, images soften. A flicker of lantern light merges into the curve of a pillow stone, into the shimmer of aurora, into the glow of distant stars. All the nights you have walked through become one, woven together into a tapestry that settles gently over you. The thread is steady, patient, carrying you deeper, always deeper. You breathe again, slower this time. The rhythm steadies, the world quiets, and your body loosens. Sleep waits, not rushed, not forced, but ready whenever you are. Let yourself drift. Let yourself surrender. Let the long night carry you without effort. You are safe now. You are calm. You are already in.